Welcome to the Purdue Crop and Weather Update for April 9th, 2024. This update is here to help growers make informed decisions throughout the season by hearing from leading crop and weather experts at Purdue. Now let's hear what we have in store for our current crop and weather conditions as we kick off this planting season in 2024.
First off, we usually start these out with a weather update, and so we've got Austin Pearson is going to be sharing his screen and showing us a few things about what the current weather is looking like for the next couple of weeks. Thank you, Austin.
Yeah, thank you, and thanks for having me. I don't know, I'm recovering from the eclipse and the Boilermaker loss last night, so bear with me. But I will say that the eclipse was probably the second best experience I've ever had in my life, behind the birth of my children. So I mean, it was pretty cool. If you were in the path of totality, it was a sight, and I enjoyed every minute of it. We'll go ahead and talk a bit about what happened this last winter, since this is our first conference call since the growing season has started, essentially. So looking at the accumulated precipitation December 1st to February 29th, we were a bit above what we would expect. We did have drier than normal conditions back in February. Otherwise, we did have some above normal precipitation in the January timeframe, which accounted for a lot of this map. Other than that, though, I mean, moisture was hard to come by in February, so we got out again. But starting back at the beginning of winter, the drought monitor was show you the drought monitor here. So that at the beginning of the winter, we had a large portion of the state, 44% in a D1 status, moderate drought, compared to February 27th, which was the end of meteorological winter, with that swath of abnormally dry conditions. Now, going through February, if you know of anyone that was out putting fence posts into the ground or working tile or anything like that, they were definitely harping that the subsoil was dry, and so that was something that we've seen and hopefully remedied a little bit of that with some of this recent rain that we've had. I did want to talk a little bit about snowfall real quick, and what that was one of the things that we just didn't see a whole lot of this winter. A lot of that can be contributed to the El Nino conditions that we've had in the Pacific Ocean, which generally is warmer and drier than normal here in Indiana. But overall, most of the state was anywhere from 10 to 20 inches below normal for snowfall. Now, we did have a couple of lake effect events up in northern Indiana back in, I think, February. But other than that, it wasn't a lot of snow. And looking at the entire winter, though, as looking at December 1st, February 29th, it was the second warmest December for Indiana, first warmest February, and the second warmest winter on record. So that was one of the unprecedented feats from that. The warmest winter on record was actually 1931 to 32 with 37.4 degrees Fahrenheit. So you see here on this, we had a 35.8, 31 and 32 was significantly more warmer than what we experienced this winter. But overall for the Midwest, it was the warmest winter on record. So, and a lot of that happened to deal with temperatures up in Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan's Upper Peninsula. So definitely something that it'll be a winter to remember for a while. Looking at the winter 2023-24 accumulated winter season severity index. So this is our Aussie. It's a way of indexing and categorizing how extreme winter was. And you can see here outside of December into early January until we had that cold snap, that Arctic outbreak, we were tracking to be the mildest winter on record. And so we had a rapid increase in the Aussie index, almost got us into the moderate winter category, but then it leveled out again. A slight uptick that February 16th timeframe where we had a little bit of snow. And then other than that, it just kind of leveled off. So really just a mild winter overall. And that's something that we've been contending with. So we'll see what that does with us into the growing season with pests and disease and stuff like that. Looking at spring 2024 so far, this is the March 1st to April 6th departure from mean. We're still tracking above normal temperatures for the first part of spring here. Accumulated precipitation, you can see that the northern part of the state has received quite a bit more precipitation than the southern part. And a lot of that is something that happened last week where we had several locations receiving upwards of 3 to 5 inches of precipitation. So heavy rain associated with that. Looking at the northern part of the state, over 100% of normal. But then you start looking down in southwestern Indiana, we're anywhere from 50 to 75% of what we would expect. Looking at the growing degree day accumulations for the last 6 days, we're tracking slightly below normal, and that's just primarily because we've had a bit of a colder start to April, and that doesn't look to hang around a whole lot longer. Now, keep in mind that this is also available on the Midwestern Regional Climate Center's page. If you go to Midwest Climate Watch, it's right on the main page. You can scroll down, and you'll be able to see those maps there as well. Looking at soil temperature, the 2-inch soil temperature across the entire state, you can see this spread here, low to mid 40s through northern and central Indiana. And then when you start getting down into southern Indiana, all of our mesonet stations are right around that 50-degree mark at the 2-inch level. Looking at the 4-inch level, pretty consistent, a little bit warmer in the central, but then right around that 50-degree mark in southern Indiana. Looking at 8-inch, 45 degrees up at Penny Purdue Ag Center, 45.9 at NEPAC. Jumping down into central, Acres at 48.9 degrees Fahrenheit, and DPAC is at 48.4. And then getting down into southern Indiana, SWAPAC is 52 degrees Fahrenheit, and same with the Crawford community schools down there, down in southern Indiana. So, and then looking at the 20-inch, 45 up in northwestern Indiana, and then 50 degrees down in southern Indiana. So we still got a bit of warming to do, and I think the forecast that we have in store will be conducive to that. One of the things that we've been a little bit concerned about is soil moisture, especially with that dry spell that we had in February, and we just haven't quite fully recovered from what we experienced last fall with the drought. But overall, you can see that soil moisture content, this is volumetric water content, is right around that 30 to 40% mark in the state. So the saturated soils, especially in the upper profile with the recent rains, something that we will see that is going to cause continued delays in field work for this time of year. Looking down at the 8-inch, we've got some sites that are in the 26% volumetric water content up at PPAC. Keep in mind, these are sandier soils up here in this region. We're seeing that reflected in the volumetric water content. But when you look down at southern soils, central soils, they're around that 30 to 40% volumetric water content. And you can see that as well in the 20-inch soil moisture maps. This is where we currently stand with the U.S. Drought Monitor. Now, last week we had a stretch of abnormally dry conditions here in central Indiana that has since subsided with the recent rains that we had in that area. We're sitting at about 11.5% of the state in abnormally dry or D1 moderate drought conditions. We have had some rains down in southwestern Indiana, but they have been kind of like the least amount of rain in the state, especially with this last system that we had as well. So the recommendations that we had sent in to the National Drought Authors look to probably keep this area in D1 with maybe a little bit of improvement of DE0 down in southern Indiana. So something to keep an eye on, and look at proceeding forward. But the forecast is a little bit different coming up here, and I'll show that here in a few slides. Did want to remind you all to make sure that you go and report your drought impact conditions across the state. Thank you all for the counties that did this week. You can see drier conditions are down in southern Indiana and no droughts up in northern Indiana based on recommendations. So something to keep an eye on with this, but I appreciate everyone that does this, and we send out weekly reminders to do this. Looking at the forecast, the heaviest precipitation is expected down in southern Indiana, up to 2.5 inches of rain expected between now and April 16th, with less rain up in northern Indiana. You can see still up to an inch in those locations. So we're in this kind of active pattern that looks to continue at least through the early part of April. So 6 to 10 day temperature outlook, April 14th to 18th. Elevated chances for above normal temperatures and slightly elevated chances for above normal precipitation. So this is through the mid-month time frame. So warmer and wetter seems to be the pattern for this. That pattern also continues into the April 16th to April 22nd. So warmer and wetter for that time period. And then overall for April, above normal chances for above normal temperatures and above normal chances for above normal precipitation. So that's kind of what we're seeing for that April outlook. So it may be maybe a delayed start for some of the fieldwork activity based on these forecasts. Overall for the season, elevated chances for above normal temperatures and equal chances for above normal or below normal precipitation in northern Indiana and in central, and slightly elevated chances for above normal temperature or precipitation in southern Indiana. With that, I'll pause. If there's any questions, I'd be happy to take them. Otherwise, I'll toss it back to you, Jeff.
Austin, there's a question in the chat from Lyndon Kelly who's asking if the soil temperature data is from grass or bare soil.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So those soil temperature data are from grass. So it'd be under sod.
Thank you for that weather update, Austin. And now we will move on to the agronomy department and start with Dr. Sean Castile.
In terms of where we're at with the season, obviously Austin did a good job of kind of giving us the framework of what the season starting like with the mild winter that we've had. There was a lot of activity, probably 2-3 weeks ago. I think a lot of people saw that, the 70-degree days kind of thing. And so a lot of fertilizer got spread. We had, I saw a lot of anhydrous for those that did anhydrous. Also look at regular fertility. Some tillage was occurring. So a lot of fields are prepped. It did have a lot of people wondering whether they should be planting or not. So I know there's a few ticks of fields out there that have been planted. If you look at the USD NAS, nothing to kind of trip the trigger in terms of reporting per se. But there are a handful of fields that are out there. I think the mentality that we've had over the last 5 years or so, we've definitely caught the trend of planting soybeans first for the most part. And so I dare say that if anything, there are soybean fields that are out there. I have not heard of anything cracking yet and breaking through of those fields that have planted. I think the biggest deal with this is just to make sure that when people are pulling the trigger, that the soil temperatures are adequate, that the soil moisture is there. And the one thing about planting in the cold soil, and then you've got a cold front coming through or cold rain, it's that first 24 hours of inhibition of that water uptake that really can cause the issues in terms of inhibitional chilling or issues that occur. I think that's for both crops for that matter. So just be mindful of that of fields that have already been planted. I think of the time that those were planted, the conditions were much warmer. So I dare say that they probably didn't have any inhibitional chilling. It's just now a matter of those few fields. Do they have enough heat units to kind of continue growing and not too much wet heat? Now, the rest of this, we have the 99.5 that hasn't been planted. I think the name of the game is, again, good conditions. I think 5th degree is a good number to see those 2-inch numbers even on grass. That's pretty that tells a lot here at the beginning of April to already have those kind of warm conditions. Now, I am not a fan of just slapping soybeans in the ground because it's April and people have got this mentality that, hey, earlier is good, so let's go even earlier. I just don't think that is a recipe for success. So I don't like to have open seed plots, even though soybeans can handle that. So I think the big deal is, once fields dry out, we're going to see a lot of activity. Be mindful of that. If people were looking at doing any applications with, hey, they're looking to see if they have reference strips of sulfur out there, certainly the last few weeks prior to this has been a beautiful spot for that. If things open up and they dry out, but they don't feel like they want to pull the trigger on planting, I still think that any applications of a sulfur source, if that's what they're looking to do, is fair game. The other part is to take the chance now that seed's getting delivered in, obviously look at the germination scores, and to take one step further is for the growers and everyone to kind of have that conversation of what's the vigor rating. If they don't have a vigor rating or a cold germ score, to call up upon the seed dealer for those lots and say, hey, do you have anything on this? Most cases they do, they just don't print it on the bags. So then you can say, okay, of the 4 varieties I've got, or 4 lots, or whatever that farm has, you say, here's the ones that definitely are better in the cooler soils, that have better vigor ratings. Those are definitely the ones to target. Clearly, if we're pushing the planting, we're in these wetter conditions, you think about good seed treatments that can help you in protecting seedling diseases. And then the other side of it is a lot of these diseases like an SDS or brown stem rot infect the soybean when it's young, when it's developing. So those roots that are just coming out, those young vegetative stages of soybeans. So make sure we have good protection in that regard. I think that kind of wraps up at least the preseason. We're really on the edge of pulling the trigger on soybeans. If we go through the whole month of April and don't have anything planted, we can still yield quite well. So it's not anything that we have to, oh man, there's a sunny day, but the field's not fit. We don't have to just slap those things in. So in general, late April, early May is a good spot for us, but we can go on either side of that and still yield well. Let's transition a little bit to wheat. I've been driving around, caught the eclipse yesterday and caught a lot of good-looking fields, a lot of good-looking fields of wheat from what I've been seeing on the drives. I haven't heard any issues thus far. We got a lot of wheat that's already jointing, kind of coming up on that normal pace. So I think, again, we have a good activity for fertility applications for the top dressing. I think we've had some rain recently that allow that nitrogen to get in, and sulfur if they needed some of that. So I think we're in a pretty good place at this point. So I'd be happy to entertain any questions.
Sean?
Yes.
Yeah. I've heard this discussion about applying potash too soon to seeding on soybeans and a potential damage to salt damage. Do you believe that? And how much water do I need between, I'll say 200 pounds of 0060 and seeding? How much rainfall?
Yeah. So to answer your first question, yes, I believe I'm the one that's been sharing it. So, and here's the situation to add some clarity. So I've looked at a number of trials with potash and sulfur to try to bring the sulfur to the table. I've looked at it on the soils that are always deficient in sulfur. So that's going to be the loamy sand, sandy loams, CECs that are 10 or less. And then I've also looked at loams and some heavier soils that have higher CECs and holding capacity. So let's start with at a more even modest rate, that 100 pounds of potash, so that's 60 units of K2O. We're about half the time when that's applied close to planting. When that's applied close to planting on these low CEC soils, we're getting on average 5 bushel. I've had a swing of 3 to 7 bushel yield hit from that application, and I think it is water related in combination with the young developing roots. And so what's occurring is that the chloride that comes with that 0060, so at a 100 pound rate, you're getting about 45 pounds of chloride. So it's burning those root hairs. And so nodulation is simply where the bacteria infect the root hairs of soybeans. And so if we have something that's burning root hairs, we're shortchanging our nodulation supply, our nitrogen supply. So that's what's been occurring. We've been able to overcome that but not gain any more yield when we've had that with sulfur or even with nitrogen. So that kind of, again, gives a little more credence to we're having issues with nodulation and nitrogen supply. My take on this is to tell people, especially on these low CEC soils, we've said for decades we need to put out the potash in the season for that field and that crop. And so my stance has been to apply as early as you can in the spring to even late winter, so that the time we had a couple weeks ago to even now, whenever things open up, to get that potash applied. The rainfall amount, that's one I haven't got. Last year, I started what I call my PKS timing study, where I did March versus that planting, but it was so dry that I didn't get any good data to kind of back, okay, how much is enough water? So a knee jerk is all I would give you, Lyndon, in terms of how much water. I definitely think that the other half that's applied half the times when we don't get a yield deficit or yield hit is because we've had enough water to work that chloride through and get it past those. So my current thoughts on this is to apply it at least a month or two ahead of planting. If you didn't get that done, to plant the soybeans, get those beans to crack, and then to run the potash across. There's my current recommendation, and again, without having a water number. The other side I want to continue on this, I've done the exact same study on the loams and on prairie dirt, and we have not got the yield hit from those at that lower rate. However, in my first handful of years, first 5 or 7 years, I did a lot of high yield management studies that included a 120-pound K2O rate, so that 200-pound rate of potash you just said. And on the loams and on the prairie dirt, at that rate at planting, I got the same thing. I got about 3 to 5 bushel yield hit. So I think the higher CEC ground just needed more to get that chloride effect. So I'm very hesitant to put out potash at planting or close to it, especially if you're on 200 pounds or more on the heavier soils as well. So time is our friend on this one. Get a good 4 to 6 weeks ahead of planting like that. So then we get that, couple of inches of rain and fall to get the chloride to move through.
I think I will go ahead and move on within the agronomy department. I do see Dan Quinn is on. Dan, can you have anything you want to share with us today?
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. Sorry, I'm sitting in a tractor right now, but I'll do my best here. Not a whole lot on the corn side, other than gearing up for planting. Right, temperatures are good, but still a lot of rainfall. A lot of fields are pretty moist. Sean may have touched on this in terms of planting timing and stuff. You're probably going to see a lot of folks move with beans and ahead of corn. Corn, it's this time of year is one soil temperature is a really, really big piece for that corn. You're going to see a lot of folks when that 50-degree threshold is hit, really start to make the movement. The challenge often with that is, if it's 50 degrees and increasing, that's good. But if it stays at 50 degrees and hovers around that, looking at the long-term forecast, it looks like our temperatures are looking pretty good here moving forward. But if you have those cooler soil temps, that seed's just going to sit in the ground. I like having 50 degrees and increasing, maybe 60 degrees, just to get that seed out of the ground. Big thing with corn is just getting it out of the ground quickly and getting it out of the ground uniformly. Planting can really make or break that crop in terms of the establishment of the crop, the uniformity, the rapidness of the growth, but also the root development. Right. I would tell you, as seed gets in the ground, we start seeing the emergence happening. Farmers call you or you see use with stand in the fields. It seems like 95% of the time, get that shovel out of the back of that truck and dig those roots. That's often where you see that issue occurring, whether it be sidewall compaction, whether it be fertilizer burn from starter or pre-plant applications and hydrous applications. Anything that even damages that radical root, that first root that emerges, will just set that corn plant, either kill it or just set it back for the rest of the year. So corn, big thing is just getting it in, good moisture conditions, good ground conditions, being patient. I try to say that it's very difficult to be patient when it comes to planting time this time of year, but it really can make or break that crop, especially if you plant into too wet or you try to push it too much with soil temps or fertilizer, stuff like that. But doing everything you can to pay attention to that crop as it starts coming out of the ground, pay attention to the roots, pay attention to the emergence patterns, the uniformity of the stand. Corn, you lose stand in corn, it's much bigger deal than even with the beans, right? We're going to have more of a yield hit on stand loss at that point in time. But, we're just kind of sitting, waiting at this point in time. We'll see if, guys in the southern part of the state will start to roll here pretty soon. That'll start telling the story where ground conditions are at. But a lot of them are still pretty wet. Looking like a good rainfall is going to come through across the state here the next couple of days. So kind of just sitting and waiting at this point in time. But, keep that in mind as the crop gets in the ground and it starts getting out of the, emerging, is just paying attention to that crop. How quick is it coming out of the ground? How uniform is it coming out of the ground? Really check those roots. Roots, a lot of times that's where you find your issues when you do have, poor stand or you're having emergence issues in that crop. But for the most part, we'll hopefully maybe things can dry out a little bit, keep these temperatures where they're at moving forward, and we'll just kind of wait and see when things start to move, hopefully over the next couple of weeks.
Thank you, Dan. I appreciate your input there. I see Marguerite is on. Marguerite, what's going on in hemp?
Yeah, not too much. We have less growers this year registered than previous years, especially on the fiber side of things. So some of you may have recalled from last year that we were going to have a processor come in Southeast Indiana and make building materials, and they have opted to move their facility, or what was going to be a facility, to Minnesota. So we have a lot of growers that decided they're not going to invest any money or time into putting fiber into the ground, which is understandable. The few growers that we do have are working with myself and some other researchers on a USDA supplemental and alternative crops grant. So we do have a few folks that will be planting grain and fiber for this research trial, but they won't be planting until May or June. So we have a little bit of time. But what's interesting about the hemp crop, if anybody has worked with it, is you do tend to see some volunteer hemp plants come up if you had it in the field in previous years. So I went out to the agronomy farm and saw hemp seedlings coming up at the beginning of March. So it can tolerate some pretty cool temperatures, but growers are going to wait, especially since seed is going to come in for them until probably mid-May for the most part. So it's been pretty slow going this year, but we will have some folks participating in production. And then we'll also still have some cannabinoid growers that have persisted over the last couple of years and have been able to make a profit and successfully plant that sort of horticultural style of the crop. But that's kind of all I have for right now. I'll have more in May when people are starting to get ready to plant.
Thank you, Marguerite. I think next I'll bring in Lyndon Kelly. Lyndon's our specialist with irrigation. Of course, he's shared across the border with Michigan too. So Lyndon, you have any thoughts about some early season advice on irrigation?
Yeah. So good water table, everything looks good. Lots of new crops going in the ground, lots of new opportunities for irrigators and contracted crops. The big thing we see this time of year is now's the time to make sure that everything actually runs, especially after last year where a lot of people were using irrigation equipment a little before they were planning on to. They needed it early in the season to incorporate, germinate seeds or incorporate nitrogen or herbicides. But anything you can do to encourage your irrigated growers to make sure the things work before we get everything else, before we get the seed in the ground, I think is appreciated in the long run. Thank you.
We will move on to botany and plant pathology. Tommy Butts is our new weed control person. Why don't you say a few words about yourself? Introduce yourself to us.
Sure. Well, thanks for having me today. So, as like you said, Jeff, my name is Tommy Butts. I'm a new extension weed scientist here with Purdue. Primarily focusing in site-specific weed management, so a lot of the new technologies and things. But with the extension, I've had an extension background, and moving forward with the extension appointment, I'll still be dabbling in everything too, from an applied day-to-day basis. A little bit of my background, I'm originally a Wisconsin kid. So I come from southern Wisconsin, worked and lived on dairy farms my entire life. Did my master's degree at Madison, did my PhD out in western Nebraska. And then for the past 5.5 years or so, I've been in Arkansas, working primarily in soybeans and rice, which is a pretty cool crop to be in for a little while there. But also got to dabble in corn and wheat and cotton and peanuts. So a little bit of everything, which was cool. So I just started about last week. So I'm relatively new to Indiana. And if you catch a weird accent, that's also why, because I've had to travel around from the north to the west to the south. And so I have a weird hodgepodge of words that have collected in my bank. So just a few things to watch out for. Basically, I'm going to echo pretty much what everybody else has said in totality for the wheat science side of things. So patience is a big deal. I was looking at the weather forecast and what was presented earlier, and it's looking a lot better for herbicide applications now. We're, above freezing. We've got good solid temperatures above 60 for the next few weeks, it looks like. So that's really good. What I would tell you is if any of your growers threw out some burn down applications, though, in the past 2 weeks, past month or so, there's potential for some failure there. Just our herbicides do not like when it's cold, especially if it freezes. There's some data out there that shows if you catch a freeze anywhere from a week before the application to a week after the application, you'll see pretty reduced efficacy in some of our herbicides. So if anybody already did apply burn down herbicides, there's some chances for some misses there, but moving forward, it looks good. Making sure things work. It's a great time like that was mentioned. Make sure to do that with our sprayers too. Make sure the antifreeze is cleared out of there, that everything's working. If we've got a pulsing sprayer, make sure all the solenoid valves are working, make sure our nozzles and screens aren't plugged, all that kind of sort of good fun stuff. Just gets us off on a good foot. And if we all of a sudden catch a big planting window, if our sprayer is already ready to go, it hopefully means that our sprayers aren't getting behind our planters either, which is always a good thing. Couple of things, I guess, just to watch out for this year, since we had such a mild winter. I'm sure most of you have seen this across the landscape. The winter annuals are bad this year. So there's a lot of henbit and purple dead nettle. You can see a lot of purple fields out there right now. The plus side, those are at least easier to kill. So 2,4-D, dicamba, Roundup, those things are all pretty easily to knock out as long as we've got the good temps and everything. The one I'd watch out for that's not as visible unless you're out there walking the fields is going to be forest weed and mare's tail. With our mild winter, that one's going to be an extra troublesome weed, especially in our no-till fields out there. And so just being aware that one's probably going to be a bigger headache this year, and to try and get ahead of it before it bolts and everything else will be pretty important. Other than that, I think those were the main things. Like I said, just echoing what everybody else had to say, be patient on some of that stuff. Make sure to stay up with our planters, though, with our sprayers and getting residuals down, and just make sure everything's up and ready to work as we move forward into the season.
Thank you, Tommy. Appreciate your insights, and we're glad to have you. I'll move on within botany and plant pathology. I did see Darcy was on. Darcy, you have anything to say with diseases? It's a little early in the season yet.
No, just the note, if you get them in early and we go cold and wet, we might start seeing some seedling diseases and other things like that. But right now, until we get crops in the ground, we won't see what's going on until we see. Well, I guess watching wheat would be the one thing if I think about it. So we'll keep an eye on the wheat, monitoring for scab or other things. But I still think we're a couple weeks out to really start sounding alarm about any diseases till we get the crops in the ground.
Thank you, Darcy. One thing I wanted to mention, we did have a training last week on soybean cyst nematode, and there were 2 counties on the map. I think there were Brown and Monroe County maybe that don't have any recorded evidence of soybean cyst nematode yet. So if you're in one of those counties, you want to pull a sample from a soybean field, it'd probably be a good idea to get those 2 counties on the map, because I'm pretty sure they're there. It's just a matter of they haven't had any samples sent in yet.
Yeah, if you do that, let us know and we can figure out where we can send them to get that done. So we'll have to send them away, but you can let us know if you have samples that I can work with whoever that is that has those samples needed.
Okay, great. Thank you, Darcy. John Bonkowski from the PPDL. I saw that you were on and wondered if you might have a few things to say. It's still early in the season for things, but I'm sure things will be ramping up pretty soon here.
Yeah, we haven't really had any samples yet because, nothing's in the ground, like everybody mentioned. The only thing to bring up is that if temperatures do kind of go back down, we may end up seeing what looks like cold stress on wheat. But there's also a virus out there, or multiple viruses, barley yellow dwarf virus in particular, that also can look like cold stress, where their leaves are kind of red or purpling, kind of around the margins and near the leaf tip, maybe even just yellowing in general. The reason I want to bring this up is that when we have a mild winter, we tend to have sometimes worse insect problems, but we might have some more problems with aphids. And so that is the vector for this kind of virus. I would just say keep an eye out for any weird coloration in the wheat, especially if it hasn't been cold and starting to purple. That might suggest there could be a virus issue. So we can test for a large number of viruses here, but we can't. Would need a sample and would need to be fresh. So please give us a call if you have any concerns about that.
Thank you for those updates and reminders, John. Now we're going to hear a quick update from the Office of the Indiana State Chemist.
We've got some outreach pieces for folks that are just trying to get a little flavor of maybe what has changed regulation wise. I would direct you to our pesticide homepage. We've developed some communication documents there that that's probably the best we can do to help explain what some of the changes are from what they have been over the course of the past couple of years. So that may be a starting point for you if you've not heard anything. And the one other thing I will bring to your attention is there was a pesticide board meeting last week, and the board voted to eliminate the June 20th application restriction for dicamba products in favor of requiring that all dicamba applications in 2024 have a volatility reduction agent as part of or a pH buffering agent or adjuvant as part of the tank mix. So that's a change that may help corn growers in particular, maybe some folks wanting to apply later season dicamba in pastures. But all the stuff that we just mentioned is available on our main page. So I would direct folks there first.
Thank you for that update, David. That brings us to the end of our first crop and weather update for the 2024 planting season. We hope that you'll join us throughout the season for more updates from our specialists and partners from across the state.